let me start the recording again. And let's start the soundtrack again. And that's what I was doing this gesture for, because that like arpeggiated piano chord is immediately nostalgia for me. And let's talk a bit about Ocarina of Time while this wonderful soundtrack is in the background. As per usual, for these unscripted reviews, a general spoiler warning. This is called unscripted for a reason. I have like bullet points, but this is not at all gonna be structured. It's just my thoughts on the game. Ocarina of Time was released in 1998 in all territories that it was released in. And it was just like over a span of a few months that it deviated from Japan to US to PAL. No. We're going to... That gets scrapped. And I do have... When I have them, I like to hold them into the camera. I do have my OG cartridge, which is, again, way dirtier than I remember. I don't know what that is. But, a little side note before we get more into the review. I like to put the box art here, and when I can, I like to put the European box art there. And for Zelda Ocarina of Time, you can see that looks way different than both the Japanese and the US box art. It's black, and the logo is entirely in gold, which is also how it is on the actual cartridge. Which is fascinating to me, that it's so different. I didn't even realize it, because even I, by now, think of the, like, beige, brown, golden-ish background with the colored logo by now. But no, this is what I grew up with. Oh man, I always like to talk about what my history is with the game, and I do have a special history with Ocarina of Time, because I got an N64 kinda late. I think I got mine at, like, in early 2000, and a lot of my friends already had theirs and had already played Ocarina of Time. But I really coveted this game. I was a huge Zelda fan even back then. Mainly because I was a huge fan of Link's Awakening and A Link to the Past. And I coveted this game so much that I actually, to distract me from it, on like a Christmas market in, it must have been 98, when, in December 98, Ocarina of Time came out, and that year at a Christmas market, I bought a game to distract me from not having Ocarina of Time. And that game is also very special to me, and it was my literally my first ever stream. It was Terranigma. 27 years ago, you old bitch. Correct. I was 8 when that happened. Which is the perfect time, I guess. I bought Terranigma and played that game. But we're not talking about Terranigma today. We're talking about Ocarina of Time. Ocarina of Time is obviously the first of 2 Zelda games released for the N64. It is also the first ever Zelda game in 3D, which is gonna be important when we talk about that in a second. And what Ocarina of Time also is, I'm not sure, I haven't checked it, but it's either still the highest rated or one of the highest rated games on, like, Metacritic. It regularly tops, like, top video game of all time lists from different outlets and people. And it's just beheld as an absolute masterpiece of gaming. Now, I have gone on record saying that I think it's kinda overrated, but we will talk about why I think that is and why I've kinda gotten even back on that opinion a little bit. But first, let's talk about the overall vibe, and the technical side of the game. What I think is fascinating when it comes to Ocarina of Time for me is because, from a technical perspective, this game was groundbreaking back then. I mean, it was the early 3D era. Pretty much every single game that came out was technically, from a technical perspective, groundbreaking back then. But Ocarina of Time was, I think, to a degree more than a lot of other games, because it also introduced a lot of control schemes and just general techniques for creating 3D environments that are still used today. The graphics, when you look back at them from today's perspective, they suffice. I actually feel like it's probably the game's worst trait from coming from today, because the frame rate is terrible. But coming from the time, and especially being like an early N64 game before they had the RAM upgrade and everything, the models are pretty detailed. They do get a good chunk of expression from the main character, and you have some decent variety in like biomes and general locations, enemies. And apparently, I didn't know this up until like recently, it was supposed to be like a disc game, like a 64DD game, but it was ported to an actual cartridge because the amount of animations and characters that could potentially be on screen was too much for the disc speed. Like they didn't want lag that came from loading all of these animations and models from a disc, so they opted to have the game maybe be smaller in scale because a cartridge didn't fit as much data, obviously, but have way faster load times, for that matter. This is the first time we see a lot of our like beloved characters in 3D, and the designs in general, with the technical limitations they had, pretty good. Like, you can see, even though obviously Link and Zelda, the design principles were already kind of set in stone, mostly through like key art. They really gave them like a new, literally a new dimension and a new amount of detail, and they have pretty much been like the main design philosophy for these characters, with tweaks rather than revolutions. That is until Breath of the Wild. But even with Breath of the Wild, you can still get like a classic green tunic outfit. And even with Breath of the Wild, the Zelda you can choose in Smash Brothers still does not look like the Breath of the Wild Zelda, but like the classic Zelda that was, while not invented here, definitely solidified in this game. And also Ganondorf, who appears for the first time in this game, an iconic design that was only built up. Like, you can draw a direct line from the Ganondorf design in Ocarina of Time to Tears of the Kingdom, because it's just so good. Obviously, with a new console also comes new technical capabilities when it comes to music and sound, and for the first time, there is voice acting in Zelda, kinda, because there isn't voice acting as we think of it. There's no dialogue voice acting. But there's the very classic Link, like damage and move sounds that he does. That was new. That was something that hasn't existed before, and it's a staple of the series now. Same with like all of the different sounds that happen when you talk to NPCs. The classic Goron. It's just so ingrained into my memory, and I feel like into the memory of a lot of different gamers out there. The music obviously is absolutely killer. It's one of Koji Kondo's best, especially up to that point. The sound design is immaculate, yeah. When it comes to the music, we actually have to talk about two different things in this game, because while we have the regular soundtrack, as we can listen to here, we also have the songs that you yourself, as the player, can play with the Ocarina, which is an amazing feat of having, I didn't write that number down, so I'm probably going to get that wrong, 12 songs, I think? That only, whose like themes only revolve around the same 5 notes, because Koji Kondo was given the task of you can only use these 5 notes for the melodies. Like afterwards, when you expand on the ideas, and once you as a player have played a song and it goes on still for a little bit, they move away from that to get a bit more freedom, but we as the player, we can only play 5 notes. And so every single piece of music, every single melody that you yourself play that has a key role in this game has to be has to consist of these 5 notes, which is an amazing feat. It doesn't sound difficult, but believe me, when you know a bit about music and you wrote some music of yourself, that's crazy. And he did it again in Majora's Mask, but well, we will talk about Majora's Mask when we get to that. What's fascinating to me, now that we like slither into the gameplay section, and we kind of have to, I kind of have to mention it now before we get into the story, is that Ocarina of Time, on the one hand, is an absolutely revolutionary game that, on the other hand, plays it extremely safe. The only way I can think about it is that because changing the gameplay so much by moving the game into a 3D world, the only way to like focus on the radical change to gameplay and presentation that brings, the only way they could counteract it is by keeping everything else incredibly safe. And that's, from today's perspective, where we are used to like 3D third-person action adventures, that makes Ocarina of Time seem pretty safe, because the revolutionary part we don't see as revolutionary anymore, because this game literally established those things. But I think it's kind of funny that like this game is pretty much just a remake or reimagining of A Link to the Past, and for the longest time people didn't seem to notice that. Right? You have the princess that you try to get, that is still in the world that you're in, and then you're tasked with getting 3 gems so you can get the Master Sword. And when you get the Master Sword, a catastrophe happens, and Zelda is ripped away from you, and everything is going to shit, and you have to use the Master Sword to go to a different world that you can interact in between those 2 worlds. You can still travel back and forth and have interactions between the 2, and you have to rescue the sages so you can eventually go to Ganon and rescue Zelda. Well, that does happen a bit different in A Link to the Past. But other than that, it's pretty much the same thing. Which again, my headcanon is that they kept that part extremely self and recognizable, so they could in some way radically change the gameplay. Adding a 3rd dimension completely shifts how you interact with the puzzles, how you interact with the world, how you explore the world, how you explore dungeons, how the dungeons are structured. A lot of things have changed. In general, it made the game a lot slower. And this is one of the critique points that I just mixed in some German. One of the points for critique that I think still stand. They didn't really have a way to make the combat feel as fluent and fast-paced as the 2D combat, which was really simple when you think about it. There wasn't really a lot going on, but it was fast-paced because of it. They didn't really have the way of doing that in 3D, at least yet. So they opted to have it more methodical and slow-paced and quote-unquote realistic. But because of that, it's incredibly slow, and they didn't really they hadn't really figured it out how to do it. So there's just so much waiting. So much waiting. Waiting for an enemy to attack so you can counterattack with the wolves and with the skeletons and with the lizards. It's kinda tedious, actually. They were also still in the early phases of figuring out how puzzles would work in 3D dungeons. There are some really cool ones, and there are some stinkers. Like, talking about the dungeons for a bit. Dungeons pretty much became a big thing in... I mean, they're always part of Zelda, but they became the focal point, also narrative and thematic focal point in A Link to the Past, because before that, all dungeons looked the same and pretty much all had the same theme. It was A Link to the Past that gave each different dungeon its identity, that also changed the way that the puzzles were constructed. And that carried over into Ocarina of Time, obviously. Ocarina of Time thankfully kept the wonderful change that Link's Awakening made and gave every single dungeon its own theme song. I don't know why that theme immediately ripped me from my train of thought. But yeah, and there are some really amazing dungeons in this game where they really had like a stringent idea that they continued through the entire time. The best example, and I think most people would agree it's the best dungeon in the game, is the Forest Temple. It has a great atmosphere. It has some cool... It plays some cool tricks with the third dimension, with the like rotating hallway, and also the just like general idea of finding the Poe sisters so you can advance to the last part of the dungeon. No notes. A wonderful dungeon. Amazing, actually. Now, obviously, that's the Water Temple, which was just confusing. Like, I know they tried to make something cool with water, and they wanted to explore water in a 3D space, because now you can show people what it's like when you dive and when you can run around underwater. That wasn't really possible in... I mean, in A Link to the Past, you had the side-scrolling things where you could dive, but that wasn't the same. You couldn't really do a lot there. It was mainly just combat. I actually never really disliked the Water Temple as much as most other people. And I also think it's not even the worst Water Temple in the game. It's not even the worst Water Temple on this console. Because, man, I will have some words for the Great Bay Temple next time. But I personally don't care for the Fire Temple that much. I think it's tedious to find the Gorons. I'm also not that big of a fan of the Shadow Temple. And also the like early dungeons are really simple. They're meant to be, right? They really need to, they not only need to like tease you into the game, they also need to tease you into a new way of playing games. But overall, gameplay-wise, this game still stands. It doesn't seem revolutionary now, because this game was the literal revolution. It was, like, it's crazy how much this game did that's still done today. And I will go more into that at the end. Yeah, but it's like the core feature of the temple, right? So it kind of, I don't know, it kind of does sour it a bit for me. It's not bad, but it is, I think it's my least favorite in the game, which is a shame because I love the music. The music is one of the best, I feel like. The story is also just incredibly safe, and it is part of the Zelda tradition, I feel like, to have either an insanely safe story that revolves around saving a princess from an evil something, or an incredibly bonkers out there story that features so much stuff that 20 years later on a platform called YouTube, people will make their living by talking about how the story is maybe just purgatory after Link killed himself. So that's the dichotomy of Zelda stories, right? And Ocarina of Time is, in that regard, also very safe. So safe that I don't necessarily even need to like talk about the story because I feel like everyone knows this. It's a damsel in distress story, and hero saves the world. It hits all the fantasy cliches without being annoying. Like, it's not the focal point of the game. Not in a way that it is, for example, in Majora's Mask. It's a story that suffices. It's a narrative that is there to convey enough to get you to explore the world. And this is for, like, you actually do have a world to explore, which is really nice. And you have these little stories that you get from the people that you interact with, like especially in Kakariko Village and the farm, which is definitely, this game is just bigger in scope than the games before, and you have more NPCs to talk to, and you have more side content to do. And one of the biggest things also is Epona. Like, this game introduced Epona and horseback riding in general, which is also becoming pretty important. Well, until, you know, Breath of the Wild introduced a motorbike for whatever reason. And I don't even want to talk about Tears of the Kingdom. But yeah, this game does introduce some staples in the series. It does introduce the Bigoron sword. It does introduce Gorons, which weren't a thing before. It doesn't introduce Zora, but it changes them so much and makes them like a sympathetic race. I'm salty about the motorbike. I never used it. Why would I have a bond with my horse, yeah? Why would I change that and use a stupid motorcycle when I can ride on my horse, who's my buddy? We're not talking about Breath of the Wild. You got the Dekus, you got the Deku tree, so many things that get added that do facilitate the narrative. They do, more so than facilitate the narrative, they do fill the world and make it more fantastical. Because in A Link to the Past, you pretty much only interacted with, like, humans. I guess in the Dark World, you had some of the more, like, fantastical beings. And in Link's Awakening, it's also mainly humans and, I guess, anthropomorphic animals. But now you have, like, different fully fledged fantasy races. Oh, it's that one. I was like, what music is this? This dichotomy of, on the one hand, being an insanely safe, almost formulaic Zelda game, and on the other hand, being so revolutionary is still fascinating to me. Like, we can think of this game as a bit formulaic and cliche because it literally created a formula. It literally became, like, it set those stereotypes, gameplay-wise and story-wise and structure-wise especially. Although most of it is just like a 3D formulation, or like the formula that is from A Link to the Past being like mashed into a 3D framework. And I think this is the quintessential 3D Zelda game. You cannot overstate the historical impact that Ocarina of Time has. It pretty much created the entire genre of third-person 3D action-adventure or action RPG. And you can draw direct lines from Ocarina of Time to the games such as God of War, Assassin's Creed, and Dark Souls. To my knowledge, I could be wrong about that, but to my knowledge, it's the first game that features Z-targeting. I mean, we're still... Maybe that's just me, but I think... Don't we still call it Z-targeting? It's not... The button Z hasn't existed in so long on a controller, but we still call it Z-targeting because it's from Ocarina of Time and we used the Z button then. It's an insanely well-made, well-crafted, at the time revolutionary game that was still so safe that we today can think of it as formulaic. I call it that. No, it's the correct term. It probably has a Wikipedia page. But when it comes to me, I feel like when people ask me, and yes, that has happened, they've never played a Zelda game, they want to play one, I always ask them, do they want to play a 2D game or a 3D game? And once they've answered that, I ask them, do you want like stereotypical or a non-stereotypical one? Do you want the classic experience or do you want one of the more out there games? And when they don't know what they want, or they say they want a stereotypical one, I either recommend them A Link to the Past as the definitive 2D Zelda game in my opinion, or Ocarina of Time as the 3D Zelda game. That's the quintessential. If you can only play one game from the series and you want to experience as much as possible, like get the real feel of what the entire series is about, you should play Ocarina of Time, in my opinion. So why did I say in the past that I think it's overrated? Well, I've kind of gone back on that. It was like a way of saying it that I wouldn't necessarily do today, unless I want to be provocative. I don't think it's overrated. For me personally, though, it's not a top 5 Zelda game contender. I have huge nostalgia for this game. I just praised the ever-living crap out of it, and I love that game, and I think it's legitimately amazing and probably deserves all the praise it gets. It's just that for me personally, I prefer the less safe games when it comes to story, structure, and like general gameplay. And again, this game, except for the huge revolutionary jump to 3D, it plays it really safe. And I like that. I like this game. I like that it does this. It was the right decision at the time. But I will always choose, like retroactively, one of the Zelda games that's a bit more weird. Like, I prefer Majora's Mask. I prefer Link's Awakening. I prefer... Well, Twilight Princess is not really that weird. But you catch my drift, right? I prefer the weird ones. So, when I talk about Ocarina of Time, I have that in mind, that my personal experience with the game nowadays doesn't reflect on the quality of the game itself. It's just that if you put 2 games in front of me, and one is Ocarina of Time and one is Majora's Mask, I will, in 95% of the time, choose Majora's Mask to play. Because a game that has gimmicks is only as good to you as the gimmick is to you. And when those like risky design decisions, when they hit, they really hit. And for like a lot of the games in the Zelda series, they hit for me. When they miss, obviously you hate the game, as a lot of people do with Majora's Mask, for example. And for those people, Ocarina of Time is the right decision. For me personally, I have huge nostalgia for this game. I will ever so often go back and play this game. But it's more like a trip. It's more like just a nostalgia trip and not necessarily me craving the gameplay itself. Still, fantastic game. It's probably one of the few actually must-play games that exist out there. Everyone should have played this game at one point in their life, in my opinion. And that's a long one. My god, that was 31 minutes. I think that was the second longest one. Second longest unscripted review, but I had a lot to say. I have a lot of opinions about Ocarina of Time.